Hello, 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 and welcome back to DLA Alternative. It's your boy Brandon, and I hope everyone is doing phenomenal as always. And thank you to everyone who keeps subscribing, liking, and following this journey. We are on the road to 1K, people, so keep killing it and get us there. But yes, also thank you for everyone who has been killing it on the Hawkins Post Theory Part 1. And yes, as you can tell by the thumbnail and title, we are jumping right back into it with the Hawkins Post Theory Part 2. But if you did not check out Part 1, go check that one out, because in that one we talked about the Zombie Boy article, but then we also talked about the article we see at the very end of Season 1 posted up in the Hawkins Police Department, okay? And it's titled the same thing, The Boy Who Came Back to Life, but it is not the same article whatsoever. So if you didn't check that one out, go check that one out, because it gets extremely interesting, and we're going to hop right into this one, because we're going to talk about those articles that 11 looks at in Season 2. And like I said, that's going to be from Season 2, Chapter 4, Will the Wise, and it's when she's in the cabin and she's cleaning up after Hopper and her got in that big argument, okay? And all of a sudden she's sweeping the floor and she comes across this little nook in the floor, and she looks under that floorboard and she ends up finding boxes of files, a shit ton of them, okay? And basically in that shot, it shows us that there's a lot of files in there, but it shows us some specifically, and it shows us one that says Dad, it shows us one that says Vietnam, and then all of a sudden it shows us this one that says Hawkins Lab, which 11 ends up pulling out and looking at those files. And that's what we're going to talk about in this theory, because there are more connections and even more crazy connections that connect all the way back to Season 1 and that mysterious article that just posted up there that has all this truth involved with it. And we do not know who put it up, but I'm going to call it that it is Hopper. And like I said in part 1 of this theory, I am assuming it's Hopper because I don't know who the fuck else would put it up. So let me know your thoughts about that, and let's hop right into this one. So basically 11's looking at those files, okay? And there's files all over the ground already. So she's been looking at a bunch of shit that we do not see, okay? But the major point is the very first article that we do see, it says Martin Brenner named in lawsuit. And if you watch part 1 of this theory, we talked about that article, and that article was written by A. Ward, a staff writer. And there was something I left out in part 1, once again, that nobody mentioned in the comments as far as I know, but we do see the name A. Ward, staff writer, at the very end of Season 1 when we see that fucking mysterious article. And if you didn't notice it, it's actually this article right below the mysterious article, The Boy Who Came Back to Life. And this one is written by A. Ward, a staff writer, and it's titled Coroner Arrested for Falsifying Autopsy Report, okay? And we know it's written by A. Ward, staff writer. It says right there. But the major point is that when we see 11 look at this article, all we can kind of see is just the title, all right? And we could see that it's 2 columns. We cannot see clearly if it says A. Ward, staff writer. We can't see that writer's name too clear, so we cannot confirm that that is the same exact article that we see in Season 1 when Hopper and Powell go to the Hawkins library and look up all of those articles. That's what we analyzed in part 1 of the series, so once again, go check that one out. But it got very interesting, and A. Ward is named once again, and I did not mention that, like I said, but nobody mentioned it either. But the major thing you got to keep in mind is that that name A. Ward is publicly put on that Hawkins police bulletin board, okay? When we see that Boy Who Came Back to Life article that has all of that truth in it, it does not have a writer's name. So keep that in mind. That's very interesting to me that that name A. Ward is publicly put out there for people to see and see who wrote that article. So that might have some major hints and some major importance going into Season 5 if all of these articles come back into place. But right before 11 just kind of disregards that article, okay, I want you to keep in mind also that we talked about in part 1 that this article does include Terry Ives, and it talks about Terry Ives suing Martin Brenner in a lawsuit, okay? So keep that in mind, because the next thing 11 does is she pulls out a red folder and it has the name Terry Ives on it. So my question to you is, before we talk about these other articles, is why is that article not involved with this folder? And what is the importance to these articles within this folder over that other article that we know from part 1 of this theory that includes Terry Ives in it and talks about Terry Ives? So why is it not in this folder? That's my question to you, so let me know your thoughts. But the next article we see after 11 opens up that folder, it gets very interesting, people, and this is the major connections we're going to have that connect everything again. So she looks at this this article and we see the heading of it, all right? And it does not have a writer's name once again, which is very interesting. And it's titled, Indiana Woman Sues Department of Energy and Claims Her Child Was Stolen, okay? And basically here, I want you to keep in mind, there's some interesting things, and there's already going to be a major connection, because right after it clips and it shows us the lower half of this article, and it shows us this picture of Mama being Terry Ives, okay? And once again, we talked about an article in part 1 involving this picture, and we only see a negative image of this picture. We don't see the physical image like we do here, okay? But the point I'm trying to make is the very interesting thing we have about that mysterious article at the very end of season 1 with the boy who came back to life, all right? That does not have a writer's name, all right? And neither does this one. But also that Zombie Boy article, which is supposed to be the same exact thing as this one we're talking about, all right? That one was actually written by a writer of the name Benjamin Buck, okay? And now we are getting another connection to Benjamin Buck, because Benjamin Buck is the one who wrote that article involving this picture with Mama. So now we have a big connection involving Benjamin Buck, and the fact that he is involved with now 2 articles that do not connect whatsoever and are falsifying the truth and keeping actual facts out of it, okay? But the thing I want you to keep in mind is that the article we see with Benjamin Buck in this picture is completely fucking different than what we see here. But the one that we see here, it mentions something about Mama, okay? And it mentions that all of this shit that she's involved with Hawkins Lab and Martin Brenner, it ends up culminating with the abduction of her child in the mid-1970s, okay? In the mid-1970s, logically would be 1975. So just keep that in mind, because I have something to say at the very end of this. But you might be wondering, oh, okay, it's just another article that's different and Benjamin Buck's involved, all right? But there is an even bigger fucking connection to this article that, once again, I left out in part 1, people, and no one said anything. But in part 1, when we talked about this article, there's actually a second part to this article, or a second clip that we get of this article within that scene. And it shows us this first part that we talked about in part 1 with the picture and the name Benjamin Buck in this article, okay? But real quickly in that scene, it clips and it gives us a closer image of this picture, all right? And it shows us text right to the left of it, just like we see the layout right before with Benjamin Buck right there, okay? But if you take a closer look, people, and you read that text that's right next to that same picture that we just saw with Benjamin Buck, that text is completely different than the text that is written by Benjamin Buck. And there is a very fucking interesting thing, people, about that text right here, because that text connects directly to the end of season 1 with that mysterious article being the boy who came back to life. Because in the first part of this series, we talked about exactly what it says in that mysterious article, and it mentions Joyce and it mentions Will's involvement with everything that happened. And then it mentions that in Ives, it doesn't say Terry necessarily, but it mentions that in Ives mentioned her disgust in the facility, and the allegation has forced an investigation into the experimentation and the perusal of mind control, okay? Well, if we look at this text right here that we get a short clip of earlier on in season 1 when Hopper and Powell are at the Hawkins library, we think this short little text is probably the same text written by Benjamin Buck, but it's not. And if you look at how that's worded, people, that's the same exact word for word writing that's in that article with Will. And the only connection, people, that we have involving that article with Terry Ives when we see it, this mysterious little tidbit of this fucking text right here, and the connection to the end of season 1 with that mysterious article up at the Hawkins Police Department, there's only one major connection to both of those right here, okay? And it's not the articles as a whole, it's a person, and that person is Jim Hopper, people, or Chief Powell. But I'm not thinking that he's really involved, because when Hopper was talking about those articles at the Hawkins library, Powell was more on the side of believing the bullshit articles, or at least the articles that are leaving the factual info out. So therefore, in my opinion, there's a major connection to Jim Hopper right here, and a major connection involving the mysterious revisions of these articles, okay? And now all of a sudden we're seeing 11 in Jim Hopper's cabin with this mysterious fucking box of Hawkins Lab articles, with this mysterious red folder, with this mysterious fucking article involving the same picture, and this one also does not have a writer's name, same as the one at the end of season 1 involving Jim Hopper, and I'm involving him now, and also that article involving Will. So let me know your thoughts about that, because it blew my fucking mind when I noticed that, and I'm like, holy shit. So that text is the same thing, and it's exactly put on that for a reason. And no doubt in my mind, somebody we know in this show is the one doing this shit, whether it's Jim Hopper or not. And in the next part of this theory, we're going to get even deeper with this shit, okay? But with all that being said, let's continue, because the next article gets it even more interesting, because we get another mysterious writer's name, being Tom Smith. And this article is titled "Daughter Jane Taken When She Was Just a Baby." And this one pretty much talks about the same shit, all right, that all the other articles are talking about how Terry Ives is suing the lab and all that shit. But there's another interesting thing also talking about a time frame, all right? And I mentioned it just a little bit ago, talking about the mid-1970s involving the abduction of Terry Ives' child. But if you look at how this one's written, and we don't know if this one's factual, just keep that in mind. If you look at this little text right here, it says that Terry Ives was involved with paid scientific experiments, so paid. And then it gives us this time frame, and it says during the 1970s. So that's another interesting fact, and I have something to say at the end of this, and I'm leaving it till the end of this, but let me know your thoughts if you know what I'm talking about. But there's another little thing right here, and I'll try to make it as clear as I can, but there's something that mentions that this writer investigated this, okay, and looked into files, and it says that Terry Ives' signatures are on paperwork giving the lab permission. So therefore, once again, we don't know if this is factual, we don't know who Tom Smith is, and we do have other Toms in this show. We have a Tom Holloway who was in charge of the Hawkins Post, okay, which is very interesting. But then we actually have a Tommy, and that's actually Steve's best friend from the very beginning of season 1, and then they end up not becoming best friends and all that shit goes down, all right? But his name's Tommy, all right? But the major thing is we do have other Toms. We just don't know who Tom Smith is, and Smith is pretty much a general last name, and that's a very, very common last name, all right? But the major thing is that now we're getting this writer's name, okay, and we're getting another random writer's name. So now we have more to fucking research and more to analyze, people. So let me know your thoughts so far, because this is getting very interesting in my opinion. So let me know. But this part, people, this is when it's going to get even more fucking interesting, okay? And we're going to have more connections that lead us back to that ending of season 1, all right? But in part 1, please go check that one out. But in part 1, we actually talked about a Richard Brenner, okay? And a Richard Brenner we do not know anything about. We just know from that little bit of an article right here, also at the end of season 1 on the Hawkins Police Department, okay? We see this little article, and this article is no doubt in my mind revised, because some of the text is exactly the same in both of these columns. It's almost identical, but it mentions a Richard Brenner, okay? And it mentions a Richard Brenner involved with Hawkins Lab from 1954 to 1971. So the thing that's going to get interesting right here is that all of a sudden 11 goes to the next article, okay? And real quickly, you have to be really quick if you watch this on the actual show, but real quickly when she goes to look at this next article, it shows this little bit of this other article, but she puts her hand over it. And in my opinion, that is no doubt in my mind done for a fucking reason. And even if you try and pause it and try and get a clear shot of what the actual text says, it's really, really hard to read. But the major thing is that it's titled, and it says child abduction blank against Hawkins blank thrown out, okay? And it's written by a Richard Fryer, okay? And this is now another time we are getting the name Richard, all right? And we had some comments on that first fucking part of this theory that also mentioned the name Richard from somebody else, and not Richard Fryer, but a Rick Lipton, which we do not even hear this name all the way until season 4 involving Eddie and where he's hiding out. The name Rick could also be the name Richard, okay? And the name Rick Lipton is also Reefer Rick. And if you really think about this in a fucking funny sense, Reefer Rick, no doubt in my mind, is fried all the motherfucking time, people. So Richard Fryer and Rick Lipton, I don't know if there's a connection, so let me know your thoughts. But in the next part of this theory, trust me, there's going to be another connection to Mr. Rick Lipton, and in an odd way. And there's going to be another connection to a lot of different things that we've talked about in a lot of other theories. So just keep that in mind for the next part of this theory. But the other mysterious article that we get right here, all right, look at the title of it. We can barely see the writer's name, all right, and it's too blurry to tell. But look at the title of it, people, and it's titled Terry Ives Suing, okay? And I'm going to ask you right now, when do we see this article, or at least this title, okay? Because the article's completely different. We see this title once again involved with Benjamin Buck, okay? And once again involved with the picture of Mama that we just saw with that other article that 11 just looked at. So now we have a third article that Benjamin Buck has some involvement with revising or keeping keeping the full truth from. And the reason I'm saying that is because his article that we see in season 1 with Hopper and Powell, okay, that's titled Terry Ives Suing. And then it says, in quote, they took my daughter. But if you paid attention to the titles of the other 2 articles we just talked about, okay, the first one says Indiana woman sues Department of Energy and claims child was stolen, okay? So that article talks about a woman claiming her child was stolen. And then the second article with Tom Smith, okay, that one says daughter Jane taken when she was just a baby, all right? So it says daughter taken. So if you really analyze this, people, and you match up this shit to Benjamin Buck in that mysterious article, he has clips from everything in his article, or at least he's falsifying info from all of these other articles, because he takes the title from this one. Those other 2 articles basically are claiming that someone says they took my daughter, okay, and that's the quote he uses. And then we see the mysterious picture that's being used in the same article, and then we get that little fucking text and that little bit of a hint that that text is different from the one that he wrote. And that text matches once again all the way back to season 1, the ending with that mysterious article like we talked about. But there's something else I want you to keep in mind, people, is that some of this text, it talks about a lot, and you can't read all of it. But the very beginning of it, if you look at it, it says the name MK Ultra. And I was reanalyzing all of these articles real quickly just to make sure. But the thing about MK Ultra and the involvement with these articles, okay, is that MK Ultra is only actually mentioned as MK Ultra in specific articles, all right? And those articles are specifically written by the name T. Bridges. So once again, we are led on this big journey of all of these writers. We get this new writer being Tom Smith. But once again, this is the last article that 11 looks at, but it ends up leading us back to the name T. Bridges in one way or another, because this mentions MK Ultra, and he's the only writer from what I've analyzed so far that mentions MK Ultra and actually talks about the experiments from Hawkins lab as MK Ultra, not just as experiments, okay? So that's very interesting as well, and I didn't even notice that the first time doing this theory. So let me know your thoughts about all of this, people, but like I said earlier, there was something I wanted to leave till the end. And that was the mention of all of these time frames, okay? That is mentioned in all of these articles, is specifically mentioned to Mama's involvement with MK Ultra and her experiments. Basically, the one article claims that it culminated with the abduction of her child in the mid-1970s. So the abduction of her child should have happened around 1975, if you think logically about the mid-1970s. But then the other article, it mentions that she was paid to do these experiments in the 1970s. It says in the 1970s, not the mid-1970s. But it says her involvement with the experiments was in the 1970s. So that raises a lot of suspicion, and you might be wondering why. But in part 1 of this theory, like I keep saying, go check that one out. It gets very interesting. But in that part 1 of this theory, we mentioned the name Richard Brenner, okay? And his involvement with the lab was in 1954 to 1971. And the thing I mentioned at the very end of that theory, people, and why I saved it to the end of this theory, all right, is because once again, we just got the hint from Netflix and from Stranger Things with this mysterious poster, okay? The mysterious missing Jane Hopper poster that everybody thinks is connected to the Chapter 2 episode, The Vanishing of Jane Hopper now, okay? Well, in my opinion, there's a lot of hints on this poster, in my opinion, specifically with 11's birthday. And 11's birthday being in 1971, all right? Well, according to these articles, this raises suspicion now, okay? Because if 11 was born in 1971, and according to Mama's flashback that we see, 11 was supposedly abducted when she was born, right? So that would be in 1971, according to this poster. But the articles that we just analyzed, all right, that one says, it says that Mama's child was abducted in the mid-1970s, so not when 11 was born necessarily. And then the other one says that Mama's involvement with these experiments was in the 1970s, okay? But from that flashback, we see that Mama is out of that experiment phase, at least for as far as we see. And we should know that from the hint we get from that quick little shot when that security guard that she ends up shooting asked her for her ID badge, which means that if she was actually involved with these experiments at the time of her doing that and trying to go get Jane and all that shit, That would have happened after Jane was born, okay? And after Jane would have been abducted, all right? But the point I'm trying to make is based off of Mama's flashback, we see 11 get abducted right after she is born. So based off Mama's flashback and based off these time frames in these articles, something is not matching up, people. And something specifically to Mama and 11 and her being Jane. And this is the last thing I would have ever expected here, people. But I don't know if these articles are factual, like I said, and we do not know which ones are revised or actually the truth. But the point I'm trying to make here, people, is that once again, we got led on this fucking loop, all right? And we got led on this loop that led us on this connection to Mama and led us onto the obvious connection to the end of season 1 with the mysterious articles. But then now also with the mysterious connection with all of these timestamps. So long story short, people, we have a lot more to analyze, but I would have never expected us to get led on this type of loop just strictly from these articles that we don't see that much. So as always, let me know your thoughts, people. I hope you guys like this one. This was the Hawkins Post Theory Part 2. And yes, in Part 3, we are definitely going to analyze the name T. Bridges specifically a lot deeper. And no doubt in my mind, there's a reason why these names are why they are. And no doubt in my mind, I think I might have figured something out, people. So get ready for that one. That should be out this weekend. And as always, much love. Keep subscribing, liking, following this journey, and get us to 1K, people. We are so very fucking close. And you guys already motherfucking know. We out.